Growing it. Greetings,
I
social
gotta
media
let mine
land.
grow out now. Gotta let mine grow out.
We are live. We are live. Greetings, social media land.
All
This
right.
is Victor with the Broward Social Network. Today is Thursday, June 18th at approximately 2 in the afternoon, just a little bit after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We have Broward County Sheriff Tony Gregory with us in order to be able to share some community updates and to talk about current events. Sheriff Tony Gregory, thank you so very much for making time out of your very busy schedule. Welcome to the Broward Social Network.
Hey, Ted, thanks. I appreciate the invite. You know, it's been a very busy time here, as you can imagine, but got to make time to talk to the community. And it's shit, you got the names mixed up. It's Gregory Tony.
Gregory Tony. All right, then thank you very much. And
I know you know, I'm just teasing you, buddy.
Sheriff Tony, I know that you've been, Sheriff Gregory, I know that you've been Zooming all over the place, just like everybody else, considering the pandemic. There's just so much on your plate, and I'm pretty sure you probably have been answering some of the same questions over and over again. And I wanted to do something different this time. I actually wanted to talk to a group of people that you may or may not have the opportunity to talk to. Actually, do you hear that? You hear that noise?
Yeah, that's a police siren outside the headquarters.
Oh,
Fort
okay.
Lauderdale's answering a call for service.
Right. Okay, I got some of my questions from various sources, but there's one group of a group of people who I believe is important to everybody, but we don't necessarily have the opportunity to speak to them, especially not now, considering that it's summertime. Are the young folks? I actually just went to my high school students, right? I said, you know, I'm going to talk to the sheriff. What kind of questions would you like to ask the sheriff? And like I said, there are a whole host of things that we could talk about, and I know time is precious, so I'm going to do my best to ask you some relevant questions. So I went to your website, and there are quite a few things, well-informed website, pretty well listed, laid out. And unfortunately, as an educator, I can tell you the public doesn't read as much as they should. So if a young person wanted to be a police officer, wanted to join your team, they're 18 years old, and they said, you know what, I want to be a police officer, they can easily go to the website to take a look at the basic requirements of high school diploma. You have to be physically fit. However, I'm actually interested in a little bit more. Considering the climate, the socio-political climate that we are in now, what would you look for in a potential police officer? I mean, at the end of the day, it is very hard for us to predict what a person will do under emergency circumstances. What would you want to see in a new young employee in your department?
Well, you know, even before the brutal murder of Mr. Floyd up in Minneapolis, and now what we're seeing in Brooks over in Atlanta, look, there always has been a focal point to bring in highly qualified individuals, meaning they met the basics for the application process. But the key part of that is not just what they look like on paper, but when we interview these young folks and these applicants, what life skills do they bring to the table? Because oftentimes we are hiring at such a young bracket where some of the candidates come in don't have life experiences, things that have a greater substance than something that they may put on the application as far as a certificate. So I'd like to try to see people who are balanced, have a great sense of humility, want to focus on the service and not get caught up in the warrior mentality that's often shown on TV shows about policing and jumping out of moving cars and chasing down bad guys and shooting. The overwhelming majority of the work we do, Ted, is service oriented. You know, it's literally maybe helping that little old lady across the street, or, you know, participating in a civic responsibility. So I'm looking for a level of maturity where they can understand that this job it's got to be service first, and you can't start putting towards this myth of what policing should be in terms of the aggressive aspect of it, because it's not that.
Okay. And from the angle of the students' eyes, again, from the angles of the young people, and again, just going through your website, because really a lot of questions can be answered by going to the website, and it's a very informative website. Talk to us about your day-to-day operations, because I don't know. I mean, I think I have my hands full as a husband, as a father, and as an educator, and what I do on social media.
Sure.
Talk to us about your day-to-day operations. When you come in and wake up, you go to work, what do you tackle first? Is there a protocol? Is there an agenda? Do you have a staff that reports to you? What do you do? I mean, do you just answer the emergencies that just emerge? What do you do day to day?
Well, let me remind your students that the Broward Sheriff's Office is the largest public safety organization in the entire state of Florida. I have roughly 5,700 employees under my command. Over 3,000 of them are first responders. We are unique. I think we're one of maybe three in the United States where I also have fire rescue services. So I have over 700 plus fire support personnel and firefighters out there. And so on a daily basis, you said, talk about, how it is when you wake up. I rarely sleep. There's always something that's occurring or going on. And on a first basis, when I come into the office, I meet with my executive command staff, which consists of all my department heads, colonels, look at major agenda items in terms of operations, things that may be needed from administration, whether it be funding, reallocation of monies, putting it in place. And we start our day out kind of in that process. And then I also go with my executive staff, which is the Office of the Sheriff, all my chief of staff, my director of government affairs, my executive assistant, and we look at all the kind of community aspects, because this is a very political position where there's a lot of networking and contact, and I have to communicate with my city officials, making sure that they have the things that they need, my commissioners, and then I kind of roll into, the operational side. Of course, we're in two really major pandemics. One, COVID-19, which we've been dealing with for several months. So there's a tracking mechanism in place to make sure I'm up to speed on the things we're doing to safeguard the community and our personnel, as well as day-to-day communications with the county who sets forth all the administrative restrictions. So that's part of it. And then, I joke, but there's truth. There's always a pivot point throughout the day where something occurs in terms of operations that may pull me out of an administrative mindset and then go work with the undersheriff to provide her support, who typically handles all the operational sides, as I'm dealing with a multitude of meetings and policy elements here. But I have the great fortune of, I have an outstanding command staff. When I came into the organization, Ted, I could have done kind of the traditional things that my predecessors done. They typically bring, a small group of friends, 15, 20 people that they know, that they trust from outside the organization, and put them in command posts. But I felt like if I did that, we would lose institutional knowledge. Every time that happens, we lose institutional knowledge. The people who know the agency best doesn't get a chance to lead it. So I promote it from within. And because of that, for the first time in the agency's history, our command staff, from colonel all the way down to major, we have like 500 years of experience. So they make it easy on me.
Okay, so on top of all the stuff that you have to do, on top of all of the responsibilities you have here, me, a community person, I'm going to ask a little bit more of you. So you talked about your executive command staff, and I must say, I went to that webpage and I saw a wonderful array of women and men of different complexions and different ethnicities. I was happy because I'm a non-English speaking immigrant, and I was raised along the East Corridor, New York, DC, now Florida, and so forth. So for me, my norm is diversity, right? So, however, I'm going to see what efforts you're making to be even linguistically diverse. And I really don't think, just like in the school system, I don't think you can have a staff that can speak every language out there. But are you making, and I know that down here, Spanish and Creole are the given, and maybe even Portuguese. When you're looking for people to join your team, is there a concerted effort to make sure that your staff is linguistically diverse? Because you can imagine that if some situation is happening out in the community and the person doesn't understand what's going on, and there's an officer who can speak that language, it could be Farsi, it could be Swahili, right? That can make a world of difference.
Yes. No, you're spot on, and we are. One of the things I learned just in my law enforcement career, speaking to exactly what you talked about, going out into, I started my career out in Coral Springs, where we didn't have a large volume of minority officers and who had a multitude of different linguistic skills with them. And what we would run into was going into that home, where, you know, maybe they were speaking Creole and we didn't have officers who could speak Creole. And so we would have to call in to dial services to translate. Well, you lose that human touch. The moment that starts to happen, when someone's speaking to you in a foreign language and they're telling you that they're afraid for their life, and you have to wait to translate that, the message is degraded. So we have more recruiting efforts to bring in minorities, but also putting together incentive packages for those who actually speak Spanish, Creole. I'm proud, I promoted my XO. He speaks 7 languages. And I can tell you, when we're running around throughout the county, he's probably speaking 3 or 4 different languages for every time we are out there. But we need that at the base level. We need that at the deputies who are out in the community on a day-to-day basis that's patrolling. They have the greatest citizen contact that our administrators would. But it was important to have the diversity at the administrative level, Ted, so that we understand the cultural differences out there. You know, for the first time in this agency's history, 2 of my colonel are Hispanic. My executive command staff, I spoke to about Major Med. You know, he speaks 7 languages. He's from Saudi Arabia, an Indian background. My chief of staff is Jamaican. My executive assistant is Jamaican. I promoted Major Andrew Dunbar down in HR, who's Jamaican. And so we're starting to really shift the dynamics, and you can see how our policing tactics are changing because we're more community oriented. We have a better understanding of Broward County population. And so as we go into more hiring practices to bring in more minorities, I think we're going to have a lot of success. You know, Ted, one of the things people don't realize is when I accepted command of the office back in January of 2019, we had roughly 230 or so vacancies at the law enforcement level. That's basically a whole police force. I mean, there's cities that don't have 200 cops. And I said, how do we pick up the recruiting practices? Because we need to prepare for attrition. People are retiring. I heard from all my city mayors and managers and saying, hey, I want more officers coming out to details. Like at the movie theater, we give them an extra assignment. They can make some extra money doing that. And about 75 details per week were going unfilled because the deputies were burnt out. They were already taxed, working too many hours. So I said, we need to get people in here. And let
me stop you for a minute, please, Sheriff. Based on what you just said, and again, as an educator, I really want to make sure that my kids, because my students will see this, and this is going to be seen by hundreds and thousands of people. On average, how many hours do your officers put in on average?
Well, the 12-hour shift. Yeah, you're looking at 12-hour shifts, 40 hours. However, because the need for personnel, this was really impacting how those men and women were actually working. So a 12-hour shift could easily turn into 16, 17 hours. Because they're covering overtime for someone, they're filling vacancies. And that really impacts not only morale, it becomes a public safety issue. And it also just drains people when they're answering a multitude of calls for services every day, which then impacts their presentation, right? How are they presenting themselves when they come out to a call? And this is the 60th call that they've been on, and they've heard this 10 times. So recruitment was crucial. I'm happy to say we've gone from 200 plus vacancies down to 59. We were on track before COVID-19 hit us and slowed down our academies and put a cease to a lot of things to be completely at capacity by August of this year. That had never happened before. But the important side of it is the diversity we were getting. We were pulling applicants who may have not been fairly given opportunities in the past. For example, we had cases, Ted, where let's say one of our white brothers and sisters would be afforded an opportunity for a job, although they had a minor misdemeanor drug arrest when they were 16. But when we looked at our African Americans and our Blacks and Hispanics, they weren't given the same opportunities. So we had to pull those applicants back out, reassess them, give people an opportunities, and they're making it out to be very fine deputies right now. So I think we're having some success there. We just have to keep pushing forward.
Well, this is on social media, and we have some people joining us live and so forth. I'm going to keep you personally accountable for that because I am a non-English speaking immigrant, and I just feel that Florida is just in Latin America, in the Caribbean. Some people may disagree. You're welcome to disagree. And I just want to be able to go into a place where everybody's represented and a whole bunch of languages are speaking. So I will hold you accountable for that. And I thank you very much for that endeavor.
You got it. Listen, I'm out there, for the naysayers who may not agree. with our perspective on this thing, it is an essential element here in this community. Broward County is one of the most diverse counties that we have in Florida. You know, we're a minority majority community. And so if we're going to expect to communicate to the community, not just from a linguistic standpoint that you speak of, Ted, but also the cultural side. You got to understand the culture, because all the cultures are different. What's popular and acceptable perhaps in a Haitian family is not the same in a Jamaican, and what's popular in a Jamaican family norms is not the same in a Cuban family or a Puerto Rican or Dominican family. So you have to understand the language is more associated to the culture than it is just the verbatim aspect of being able to articulate and communicate with somebody.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have a question live from Sandy Boyce Rond, and I apologize if I am mispronouncing your name. And this is a question I actually do have on my paper as well. So coincidentally, she's asking, I'm not versed in the world of law enforcement. What calls are answered by the BSOs versus local police departments?
Wow. So the Broward Sheriff's Office, I'll go back, is the largest public safety contractor or service provider here in Broward County. Roughly half of the cities, we are responsible for either providing law enforcement, public safety services on that side, or fire rescue. So from calls from service, when we're talking about the law enforcement realm, it could be anything from assisting somebody in a car accident. It could be a domestic violence call. It can be an armed robbery suspect. It could be a theft at a Walmart, and a multitude of other baseline crimes. But at the same time, because we have a ton of different departments and units. So for example, we have Child Protective Investigative Services, which is partnered up with Department of Children and Protection and Family Services to go out and investigate any type of harms or threats that may go to kids. So we receive those calls too. Then we'll roll over to the medical side. Because we are contract with the multitude of cities for fire rescue services, we may get an EMS call for an injury, major medical incident, heart attack, cardiovascular issues, and so on and so forth. So we get everything. Call volume, just to give you an idea, we receive roughly 2.5 million calls for services throughout Broward County every year, 2.5 million. So that is a large volume of calls for services that we are handling in conjunction with fire rescue and some of our municipals out here.
So just for me to understand, and again, don't take any offense to this, you're talking about high level stuff, right? So I want to be able to have somebody in the 10th grade understand what you're saying. Is there a place whereby a police officer from Pembroke Pines would say, well, we don't cover that, you have to call BSO for that? Is that how it works? You guys have an agreement of who's responsible for what?
So let me give you a global for your students. So when we're looking at the Broward County Sheriff's Office, the Sheriff's Office operate under a constitutional requirement. So the Florida State Constitution requires that a sheriff represents this county. The sheriff is considered the chief law enforcement officer for all county entities, right? Here in the county, there's options to be considered what we call a municipal, an independent operating city. Half of the county falls under the jurisdiction of my office, the Broward Sheriff's Office. The other half of the county has individual cities who have elected to hire their own police force. So Fort Lauderdale have their own police department, Pembroke Pines, Plantation, Miramar, Coconut Creek, Coral Springs, Margate. And so as you can see, there's a couple more, Hollandale, Hollywood, that have their own police departments. However, we have something here called a regional communications program or system in Broward County, which means all the reported calls for services are reported back into the county, into one entity, regionalization. So when I say 2.5 million calls for services coming through this county, that's to include even those cities that don't fall under Broward County. Is that good, Ted?
Okay, I'm still gonna have to go back and break it down for them, because you know what I would like to see on your website? You know what I would like to see on your website? You know what I would like to see on your website is I'd like to actually see a flow chart. I don't know, because some people are different learners. They like to be able to.
I can send you something.
Yeah, but I'd like to actually see it, even though most people are not going to read it and so forth, because the average person is not going to read it and so forth. But there's power in the image, right? There's power in the visual. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
No,
okay.
I get it. I got that teacher background with you.
Right. Okay. Next question. I'm going to share with you a few names, right? So,
Okay.
Thurgood Marshall, Dr. David Satcher, Robert Runcie, Brenda Foreman, Tony Gregory, right? The first African Americans to hold these high-level positions, right? And there are countless
Correct.
others. Now this is a wonderful thing. Now I'm going to share with you a different list of names. Robert Fuller,
Okay.
24 years old. Malcolm Harsh, 38 years old. Dominique Alexander, 27 years old. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Ahmaud Arbery, Rashad Brooks, right? So 2 steps forward, 4 steps back in 2020, right? This is not a question about you being a sheriff. This is a question about being a human being and an African American. How do you grapple with that today? How do you grapple with that today? Because I don't think there's, how can I put this differently? And I know that I'm live. If you or I were in a different part of the country, we could probably be pursued and suspected of being something other than wonderful, right? How do you grapple with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, listen, Ted, I've grappled with it my entire life. Look, I'm a Black man in America. And I can tell you long before, the names in which you echoed, the victims, I've been there. I grew up in the inner cities of Philadelphia during the 1990s on a drug pandemic that consumed the entire community, survived home invasion, seeing my best friends' heads blown off in front of me. And I recall being a young man saying, I'm going to get out of this community and use athleticism to get out. And even as a student athlete, I've been slammed down to the ground and had a knee on my neck, literally. And so when I'm watching Mr. Floyd grasp for his last breath of life and hope that somebody will treat him as a human being and recognize that they are taking this man's life, it's hurtful. But it's also part of what inspired me to be here. I decided a long time ago that I was no longer going to be slammed on the ground and treated through racism and prejudice and discriminatory practices. Instead, I would put on the uniform and be that change agent. And I have, through God's mercy and blessing, I've arrived here in this organization to be part of that list on the other side that you talked about. The first African-American sheriff in 105 years. As diverse as this county is, it took 105 years to arrive here. And it wasn't at the hands of the people. It was at the hands of a tragedy that allowed me to accept this post. And so when you look at how things are developing, I'm obligated, and I appreciate your professionalism, and I carry it as well, but I am obligated not to just speak as a sheriff. I have to speak as a Black man in this country who have survived the systemic racism that exists. I have to speak honestly and say it exists in this profession, and it doesn't only exist in law enforcement, but it exists through the entire criminal justice process, from the court proceedings to the Department of Corrections. I'm an educator, all right? I've been an adjunct college professor for over a decade. I've taught just about every course you can imagine in criminology and criminal justice. So I'm a student of my craft. And every single statistic as it relates to dealing with African Americans and Black and brown people in the United States suggests, one, that law enforcement disproportionately make arrests of Black and brown people. Fact. Now I'm the chief law enforcement officer. When I looked at the statistics from the moment I came into this organization, I think in 2018, Ted, our misdemeanor arrests, we had roughly 7,000 arrests. 70%, 4,900 were Black and brown people in our jail. That is part of the systemic problems that we have. This is part of why the Black and brown community, men like us, have a hard time trusting law enforcement, because the facts and data points are there and our personal experiences are there. Then we look at what occurred in the Department of Corrections, from the mandatory sentencing guidelines that have been in place for decades now. Again, disproportionate representation are Black and brown people that are suffering the greatest penalties in terms of incarceration. We even have legislation that was passed related to criminal behaviors with narcotics, cocaine, where cocaine, a powder-based substance where there's no real major chemical difference from crack, had 2 different punitive levels to it. People in the inner cities, people I grew up around, were going to prison for almost a lifetime for possession of crack cocaine or distributing it. Where if you took the same value of powder cocaine, they were getting off free, almost free. They weren't suffering the same damages. Then we look at the courts in itself. Statistically, data shows if you are represented or being presented in front of a judge of color, you had a less likelihood of having stiffer punitive elements being sentencing on you. So the sentencing guidelines even show biases. So how could I, having the experiences that I've had, having survived in inner cities, being homeless, suffered police brutality, gone through law enforcement and breached the discriminatory practices in this profession? I was the first of many likes before I was the first African-American sheriff, Ted. I started my career in Coral Springs. I was the first African-American SWAT operator. I was the first African-American field force commander. I was the first African-American burglary detective. And then I became the first African-American supervisor, making the rank of sergeant in the history of the agency. It was only 20 years ago. So I am compelled to ensure that I bring diversity to this organization, which we have and we shall continue. But I'm also compelled to make sure that I breach this system that has exhibited all signs and symptoms of not being just. And anyone, regardless of the color, black, white, brown, or other, should encourage that type of leadership and expect it. You got me, you touched something personal to me, my friend, so I start going.
Listen. You know, I have two enemies. I only have two enemies in life. I don't know about anybody else. Time and distance. Time because I don't have the time to, I don't have the time to cover all the things that I like to cover and so forth. This is a wonderful opportunity. Sure. And distance because COVID-19 is keeping, the distance is keeping me away from COVID-19 is keeping me away from loved ones and so forth. So, you know, no need to apologize because I'm from the Caribbean. However, you know, being from Latin America, I'm Dominican, Haitian, Cuban. However, in America, it doesn't matter. We're both bald-headed black men in America, so it just doesn't matter, you know, so.
That's right. That's right.
I have so many questions, but you talked about quite a few things there, which is wonderful. The law enforcement, your world, is the space between the communities between law enforcement and the legal system, right? Do you think, this is such an unfair question, do you think a police officer of color will see Johnny in the neighborhood with doing something wrong, is less likely to arrest Johnny versus a police officer who's not of color is going to say, you know what, you're up to no good. I'm going to go ahead and arrest you and bring you in. And what's connected to that is, what are your thoughts on police officers living in their community versus living outside of the community? Because there are two schools of thought, right? My thought is, if a police officer is my neighbor, he's less likely to arrest me because he knows me, right? But police officers have said, well, no, we do not want to live in the community that we police because of the fact that there might be retaliation onto our families. So what are your thoughts?
Wow, so you have two dynamics there. The first part, do I think if an African-American or a person of color is in contact with another person in color in the community, are they more than likelihood to be more sympathetic to maybe minor infractions and crimes, right? I got that correct, the question? Right. I think absolutely yes, because I was that officer. I can speak from my own experiences. I had a better understanding of the community issues because I had grown up in them and I had survived them. And I knew that sometimes some of the criminal infractions that we seen were more of a byproduct of the social inequalities than it was a criminal pattern. And so I wanted to give people an opportunity and not put everyone in handcuffs, because that's not the solution. You impact people's lives forever. But I will also say this, it's not just a matter of a person of color, but a person of color in similar experiences. Because bringing someone here, a black man who has zero understanding about what it's like growing up in some of our inner cities and our impoverished communities, will more than likely still not be as sympathetic to understanding the plights that exist. For example, I hate to use it in this fact term, but if you grew up with a silver spoon in your mouth Doesn't matter if you're Black, white, or Hispanic, you're not going to understand these.
That's true.
So I think
That's
it
true.
could work both
That's true.
ways. It could be one where we see officers, and I would encourage them to be more sympathetic and give these things. Then the second side to your question, Ted, most people don't know this, but I think roughly somewhat 30+% of our law enforcement officers live in Broward County. About 30+%. I'll give you facts on the numbers around. So I have over 1,500 law enforcement officers. Less than a third actually live in the county. There is a correlation between understanding and living in the community on a routine basis that will impact how you serve it. That's not to say you can't live outside this county and be sympathetic, but your investment is slightly different because you have to know this community. You live in it. You understand the dynamics that exist within the social injustices that exist. So I think it goes a long way when all deputies actually live here and also are from here, which has been a big recruiting initiative of ours. When I promoted Major Dunbar down in HR, I said, we need to tap into the talent that's already here. We need to tap into the people who need opportunities for employment and give them a chance to go back and serve their community. My undersheriff, I was proud that I promoted the first Black female undersheriff in the history of this agency, Nicole Anderson. She is a Broward County native. And for us to go out through social events and for community members to see her and talk about high school class, Dillard's High School, it goes a long way because these young people are saying, if she can do it, and if he did it, then I most certainly have an opportunity to do the same.
Right. I did see her on your website, by the way. She's the first box out of 20. I did see her.
Did I lose you, Ted? Oh, you go.
You hear me? You heard what I said?
Yes.
Yeah, I did see her.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. All right. So a couple more things. Talk to us about, this is from your website. And today is Thursday.
Thursday the 18th.
Yeah, today is Thursday the 18th. Not yesterday. Was it yesterday? On Tuesday, I had a shock. Maybe it shouldn't be a shock. Maybe it's not. Maybe it won't be a shock to you, but it was a shock to me. I'm driving. I'm looking for parks where my kids and I can go bike riding because I want to see whether or not certain parks are open. And I drove through Cooper City and I saw an amazing line of cars waiting. And, you know, I'm a community person. So I rolled over and I said, what's this line for? And this is Cooper City. As far as I'm concerned, a lot of affluent people live in Cooper City. This was a food line. This was a food line. People waiting for food. Yep. And I said, what do you mean by food? They said people, they're giving out milk, they're giving out meats, they're giving out fruits and vegetables. So because of the pandemic, because of the economic downturn, there are some folks in real difficulties now. So when I went to your website, I saw Operation Helping Hands. Talk about Operation Helping Hands.
Yes. So, you know what, one of the things I wanted to do when we established all the new constructions for police accountability, from early warning systems to track people, built the use of force review board. I hired Judge Julian Gonzalez, another Dominican brother, to be the chairman over Professional Standards Committee. I said, all that's great. I said, I know that's great, but what else can we do for the community? And I saw what was occurring with this COVID-19 crisis, and people were losing jobs. People were faced with paying a mortgage versus paying for food. People were losing cars. So last year I created something called our neighborhood support team. And it's a combination of deputies and civilians who go out into the community to get a better understanding of what we can do to help them at the social level, not policing, just at the social level. And we found out that people were literally just running out of food. So we contact Feeding South Florida, a large food distribution center here in South Florida. And we said, listen, what can we do to participate and help get food out? He says, I don't have Paco Velez, the president over there. He goes, I don't have the bandwidth, Sheriff, to get this food out. So I said, all right. I talked to Captain Renee Peterson, who heads up neighborhood support, Captain Aubrey Jones, who head up community services aspects. And we built this model to create food distribution lines so that we can help get food out all across Broward County. And working with them in just about 60 plus days, we helped issue out over 16 million pounds of food in Broward County. That speaks to the needs and necessity. And I've been out and we've had lines like you talked about in Cooper City and Lauderdale Lakes and Pompano and Deerfield Beach and many others that people are in line for 3-4 hours. So this is a very serious issue in terms of how this COVID-19 crisis is helping. And I'm proud that we're not just, crime fighters. We're out here doing work that helps this community. And I dedicated another $100,000 just 2 weeks ago back into Feeding South Florida to purchase another 700,000 meals for Broward County. It's important, Ted. And if we don't do this, it will hurt a lot of families.
Sheriff Gregory, but is this an ongoing plan? Is this a temporary situation? In other words, if my neighbor is hungry next month, can I call you and say, look, my neighbor next door needs food? How is this, or do I call Feeding South Florida?
Feeding South Florida has been the primary distribution element of it, but we are partnered up with them. And as we continue to receive monies from our Law Enforcement Trust Fund Bank, which is a forfeiture fund, we can contribute and keep helping pushing this initiative. Because one of the things I'll never forget this. I was out with our team on Operation Helping Hands, and we went out to a mobile home community where predominantly the populations were elderly folks, 75, 78. And I knocked on the door and I go up to this lady's home and I said, "Hi, I'm Sheriff Tony. We're here to support you. We heard you all need food." And this woman said, "Thank God I was down to my last jar of peanut butter." I was down to my last jar of peanut butter. I'm like, if this is happening now, we can't just stop this type of support because these people are going to run out of food, whether it be 30 days from now or 60, and who's there to care for them? So it's my goal to keep this initiative going and supporting Feeding South Florida and making sure that out of this roughly $1 billion operating budget, that we're doing things to touch this community.
Well, okay, a couple questions come to mind as well, but let's just switch gears just a little bit. As you know, I've been a teacher for nearly 20 years, and I teach at Broward County Public Schools. I'm not necessarily sure. Give me an understanding, and again, this is with students in mind. Give me an understanding of the relationship between BSO and Broward County Public Schools, because when we have our officers on campus, they don't come from your department.
Well, it depends. So again, going back to that early model, the Broward Sheriff Office, we cover a good portion, I think over 60 plus schools. We provide the school resource offices for the Broward school system. So we're contracted to 60 of 200 plus different schools. So our law enforcement officer personnel are there. So we have a good relationship with the school board because we're that first line of defense in the sense of if they need services from our SROs or support mechanisms in place for security or programs, we're there to help them. But we also launched something last year that I was very proud of because with the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas tragedy, we learned that we need to better utilize technologies to safeguard our schools. So I worked with Superintendent Runcie last year and design out a contract agreement, which would allow my new real-time crime center that we built here, which is a comm center that allows us to track and monitor real threats that are coming into our schools. And we currently have the capability to monitor live feed over 10,000 cameras across 256 schools here in Broward County. It's the first time in the county's history that that type of program was launched. And Ted, it was really just a matter of reallocating money. This didn't cost the county a penny. It didn't cost Superintendent Runcie any money to pull out of his school budget, which is a monster in itself. He's got a lot of moving parts there, but we accomplished it. So the relationship we have is great. And we also start doing active killer training, and we're working on new projects to help support the training in the schools because we're the experts. School teachers shouldn't have to figure this stuff out on their own. And then I'm glad you said
that, and pardon me for interrupting, because there was conversation on the board on the table about giving teachers guns. I am not interested in that at all.
Totally. I'm totally against it.
Okay. I don't,
I'm totally against it.
and then there was talk about, well, we're going to take volunteers. I don't want my neighboring teacher to have a gun either. Okay, so we want, and then you're
Yeah,
going to get me riled up. You're going to get me riled up, and I don't want to lose my composure while I'm live on air, because just there's no way
no,
that a teacher, there's just no way that a teacher should be having a gun in the classroom. There's no way, no way.
You can maintain your composure, because when this legislation was passed, I was the first one against it. I told the governor I was not going to, support arming teachers here in Broward County. I wrote a letter up to the Senate, and because the Guardian program, which provides the training for teachers who wish to be armed, falls under the sheriff office. So if someone wants to be trained to carry a firearm and they're a teacher in their schools, they're not going to be approved through the Broward Sheriff's Office. I won't allow for it. I am a subject matter expert in that arena. I've been an instructor in active shooter preparedness and response protocols, tactical medicine, and I've trained officers and federal agents across this country. And the solution is not arming our teachers. And just from a principle standpoint, think about this. The day we have our teachers, Ted, preparing their lesson plans, having a cup of coffee, getting ready to go to school, and as they're walking out the door, they say, let me go grab my 357 or my Glock. We're lost as a society. The day you have to walk into a school and think about not only teaching the student, but having to kill that student, we are so far off, and that's not the solution.
Right. That would have to be a different segment, because I can tell you there are different ways to psychologically manage the classroom. My body position alone can affect the dynamic, but walking in there with a gun around my waist, or even if it's not visible, just the thought of the gun being in the classroom, I don't think kids can even learn in that environment. So we're not going to go there. All right. So you mentioned Governor DeSantis. Give us some historical perspective. And I know he's been on the media. I know you talked about it many times. How did you end up in Florida? How did you end up here? How did you end up on the list to become our first African-American sheriff? How did you get on the list?
Well, yeah, listen, I tell you, it's quite the story. I started my career here in Coral Springs back in 2005. Had a lot of success, and one of the things that I was involved in was building out the active shooter training program for Coral Springs Police Department. I ended up writing a research report, going up to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, bringing all the skills down here, and helping develop that platform. And I'd gotten very good at it, so much so that I designed my own company behind it and started to make my own money. Went into entrepreneurship, started my own company with my wife, and lo and behold, we moved up to South Carolina for a short period of time on a business contract, and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting happened. And I'll never forget it. I was watching on TV, probably like many people, and I saw police officers that I trained from Coral Springs running into the building, pulling students out, rescuing them, doing the things that we taught them. And maybe all of 2 days later, I considered looking at this and I said, I probably need to go home and help. And I talked to my wife, and she's like, look, if that's what you want to do, go ahead. I'll support you. And then the icing on the cake was my former chief of police at Coral Springs called me. And he goes, Greg, everything that you have been preaching about for school safety and active shooter preparedness, they're finally listening. You might want to come back. And I came back and I started lecturing and teaching. I left my wife in South Carolina for a month, was not making any money for business deals, just volunteering my time. And it caught wind that, hey, this was the guy that, helped design the active shooter training at Coral Springs that was a success. All the family members who lost individuals start hearing about it. And then my name came up where the examination was, there were so many systematic failures and that the governor was going to remove my predecessor from office. And I was one of 3 people that were actually called for an interview. Didn't know the governor, not his friend even to this day. I was the second candidate being interviewed, and it went from a 30-minute interview to 45. And at the end of it, I was offered the opportunity to come down here and be the first African-American sheriff and chair this thing up and get it done. So 18 months later, here we are. We went from being the, worst prepared active shooter organization here and comparable to what happened to having all the top certifications through the FBI, Homeland Security. We built out a real-time crime center to track and monitor our schools. The threat management division is handling these cases. We're not dropping our eye on protecting our kids in our schools. We broke ground on a $30 million training center, the first training center in the history of this agency, which is going to allow us to lead up the regional training for all agencies here. We talked about how the diverse command staff has never happened here. Talked about the recruiting aspects, neighborhood support teams. All these great initiatives are coming from this organization in just 18 months, not 18 years, 18 months. And it's really just been because I promoted the right people. I didn't disrespect the organization. Since I've been in office, because I brought people up, Ted, we've had over 400 promotions and half of them been female. And of that half, 67% have been Black females. So we're making a significant change from a cultural standpoint. We're using money the right way. On top of that, these men and women received the best raise they received in 25 years, and they didn't ask for it. I had the money there. I gave them what they deserve. So I think it's a unique story, but it starts long even before, I arrived here. It starts in me persevering through the streets of Philadelphia. I left Philadelphia with less than $500 in my pocket to chase after a dream, to play at Florida State, got the job done, played the national championships, played for Bobby Bowden. And then when I was challenged to become a police officer, and there was doubters there, and people thought I became one of the most decorated police officers in the history of Coral Springs. In just 10 years, I had acquired the Meritorious Award for rescuing a woman who was being brutally beat. It's one of the highest commendations you can get. 8-time recipient of the Exceptional Police Service Commendation, which is a sought after commendation for anyone who's, a proactive police officer, and many other commendations. And so I'm excited to see where we go. I think it's just important to educate the public, as we are coming into this political selection process, to let them see what we've done in this administration.
Speaking of political selection process, are the lines of communication between you and the governor open? I mean, do you have his endorsement?
Yeah, you have to continue the communication. Yes, I know there has been a lot of slandering and smear campaign efforts to try to get me removed. But the reality of it is the governor has examined all the great work that this administration have done and has said, look, this is up to the people of Broward County to choose. We're 60 days or so out. It's up to Broward County. And you have to maintain an open level of communication, because even for the first time in this agency's history, we are now communicating with our state officials and receiving funding down here to support efforts. We got roughly $750,000 from the state this year because I was able to communicate with the governor, communicate with the Senate, and say, I need this for our DNA and crime lab. I need this money to support our real-time crime center. That never happens here at BSO. So I think the relationships are where they need to be, but the people need to understand, although this is a political role, people have the right to elect it, but this is a public safety profession. And so what should be the leading point of understanding is the community safer? Are we using the funds in an appropriate manner to make sure we're not abusing the system? Are we fair and equitable in what we're doing, from hiring practices, diversity, and how we treat people in this community? And are we better off for where we are trying to change the police reform and unite this community now? Or were we better back then? And when they look at the realities behind it, I'm confident that they'll see that we are better off now.
So let me ask you again, will the governor endorse you? Do you know?
I don't know. I haven't called and asked for an endorsement. I've been busy. So okay. I have not called up there looking for his endorsement.
Here's
the best endorsement I can get, Ted, people's.
Yes, that is true. I ran for office once. At the end of the day, it's all up to the voters. That is true.
That's right.
So here's another question which every single professional must face, really every single individual must face, and it's really something that is really tough to handle. And this is one of the many reasons why I interview people. I like to get the story straight from the person, and I like to be able to have all individuals have the opportunity to control their own narrative. right? Regardless of what's on the media, you know, your history, what has happened in Philadelphia, regardless, let's just say it all amounts to a cloud of questioning and trust. How are you trying to overcome or win over the trust of the public? Because that is tough. Okay, that is tough, regardless of what has been said, because there are many of them, and you talked about them already in public and on social media, your childhood, what, you know, applications, drugs, personal lifestyle. Okay, you put that all together, it creates a cloud of the questioning of trust. How are you working at attempting to gain the trust of the public?
Well, I think you generalize the public. It's a big public here. It's almost 2 million people here. And I can tell you my encounters is this, that the people understand what the efforts are behind these smear campaigns and agenda, which is to distract the community from the service that we've performed and the successes that we're having. And the community is much more informed and educated than people are giving them credit for. I can tell you thousands of people that I've encountered over the last 2 months or so are saying, stay focused. We appreciate the work that you're doing. So if the notion was this was going to create a big mistrust of Sheriff Tony, quite frankly, it backfired. I think if nothing else, people are saying, wait a minute, here's a man who had to take on an armed suspect in his life as a 14-year-old kid. He survived that. He came and pushed forth. He's been a decorated law enforcement officer. He's been a decorated, supervisor, and he's been a college professor, all these things. And now he is outperforming as a sheriff. We've done more quality and substantial work in just 18 months than what's been done in the last 15 years. That's what people need to pay attention to. So I don't think I have an issue of trust with the community. I think we just need to keep educating them.
Okay. All right. So we are.
I think we got time for one more, Ted.
You beat me to that statement. I'm looking at the clock, about to say one more question. All right. So
you don't see the team here saying, hurry up, we gotta go.
I'm literally watching the clock as well. So in closing, I want to just thank you very much, because the honesty is that Broward County residents are still getting to know you, Sheriff Gregory. We're still getting to know you. Personally, I admire anybody who's in a leadership role, who's able to take on so many responsibilities. As far as I'm concerned, you have the most important job in Broward County. You're responsible for my safety and the safety of my family. So I commend you for all of your efforts. I'm not necessarily sure what's going to happen after election season, but for now, for today, you are the sheriff. You are the appointed sheriff. The voters will make their decisions. The other, your cohorts, the other members who are interested in applying for your job, the other candidates, I will have a chance to speak with them as well. Before we close, I'm going to give you the opportunity to give a closing statement to Broward residents. There are a few people live, and if they're not seeing it now, they will eventually see it. What would you like the public to know? Because we can talk about the details of what people have said, but this is your opportunity to control your own narrative. There are just a lot of stuff going on out there about people who agree or disagree with you, but I want to hear from you. This is your opportunity, and I will give this opportunity to the other candidates listening as well. What would you like to say to the community residents, the voters or residents of Broward County, before we close?
Well, I think it's kind of simple. I want the community, one, to understand that I'm currently the sheriff here, and I am not distracted. We have a lot of things occurring in this community right now between COVID-19, this excessive force issues that are occurring, protests, and making sure people are safe. Talk about that we're feeding people from this capacity in this role. We're changing policies. We're putting forth money in a more responsible manner. But here's the reality. There is a time of election coming up. There's a short period of time, a short window. And we as a people have constantly relied on things that other people are telling us versus researching and finding your own facts and making sure you understand what's going on. This office is the most powerful political position in Broward County. And with that, it must be yielded in a responsible manner. It can't be utilized for self-gain. It can't be ignored in terms of its public safety priority. It's public safety priority. And it most certainly cannot be allowed to degrade to a point where we're losing people in schools, losing people to excessive force on the streets, losing people in our airports. This organization must be run at the highest level of public safety standards. And you as the public have an opportunity to ensure that that happens, to ensure that it happens. There's a lot of smoke screen designed to distract you from what is important, which is this agency being managed correctly? Is it providing the public safety that you expect and deserve? And are we on the right track for what we expect for this entire community? Because I'll say it again, this organization reaches over 1,300 square miles and touches everyone to some shape, form, or fashion. And if the leadership is not intact here, because I've promoted over 400 people, and the men and women who are serving have 25, 30 years on, and they deserve to lead this agency. If that doesn't stay intact, then we are going right back to the past. And you can't roll the dice and guess on the future. You can look at what's presently occurring with no agenda, with no incentive, with no I owe anyone's, and see that we are doing the right thing for this community. And if that works for them, if that works for you, then I'll be proud to be your sheriff for 4 more years.
Thank you for that statement. Before you go, and I know you said only one more question, can you talk about, because we are very much still in the pandemic and the numbers are going back up, can you talk about PPEs and your staff? Because I don't know if I've seen police officers wearing masks out in the streets.
Our PPE inventory, again, this is part of that smearing element, but what I can say is we ordered over $4 million in personal protection equipment. Ordered, inventory. There is no organization in this county better prepared than the Broward Sheriff's Office. And that's not just for law enforcement, that's for our fire rescue. And our men and women have a robust supplies where they can come in and we continue to distribute it out. And I have not taken a lax approach because we're seeing them out peak in this virus as we've tried to integrate the normalcy of businesses and communications. So we're still purchasing equipment. So the community should sit with confidence, knowing that we will be there to answer our calls for services, and we will be prepared to not only protect ourselves, but protect them.
So your officers are wearing masks while they're out there in the community?
They have the masks, they have the gloves, they have the gowns, all the items that they need to do their jobs effectively.
Okay, awesome.
We're not short on anything.
Well, I thank you very much for your time. I let you know that, and this is again going out to all of the candidates running for sheriff. You have the opportunity to get an hour to speak to the community, but the fact that you are the sheriff and you made time to speak to the thousands of people who will see this, I do appreciate that very, very, very much. I wish you and anybody who is actually trying to save the world the best of luck, because it is not easy. Okay, you are currently the person who is literally standing in front of the bullet for the community, and that in itself, sir, is very, very commendable.
Thank you, Ted. I appreciate it. And I'll see you soon, my friend.
Okay, you have a good afternoon.
All right, have a good one.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.